last time on a Tekken Retrospective. Basically nothing happened, as the last game was a non-canon spin-off and all it really added to Tekken was a weird, gooey version of Jun Kazama. So, moving on. The actual proper sequel to Tekken 3, Tekken 4, takes place 2 years after the events of the last one. Jun Kazama moved to Brisbane, Australia to unlearn the Mishima fighting style his grandfather Heihachi had taught him, and was training tirelessly to learn karate. Meanwhile, Heihachi continued to run the Mishima Zaibatsu and waited for Jin to make a move, as despite the fact that Ogre was defeated, now he had to defeat and get rid of Jin, another devil in the way of world peace as he saw it. And while all the events of Tekken 3 were unfolding, another biotech company known as G Corporation was making the rounds with biogenetics research. Heihachi had learned that somehow they'd recovered the remains of Kazuya's body, the same body he had hurled into a volcano 20 years ago. Something malicious was brewing in the air, and the course of the world was about to be altered, for better or worse, in the coming months. Tekken 4 is kind of widely regarded as one of the biggest fighting game flops of all time. It nearly killed the series and drove Harada to quit for some time, but why is that? This is a small part of what I want to cover in this video. What drove the developers to make such huge changes? What were the risks they were taking with some of the innovations they were trying to bring to the table? Why did they fail, and how come some fans still love the game even over 20 years later? Tekken 4 had begun the very early stages of development and concept writing directly after the release of Tekken 3, some of which had to be halted due to the development of Tekken Tag Tournament coming into play, then the further work for the console version of that game. But still, all things considered, the time gap between Tekken 3, Tag Tournament, and 4 was almost non-existent, and Tekken fans at the time were getting treated on an almost yearly basis. Other than that, all we really know about the development cycle of Tekken 4 is the possibility of some characters being cut due to announcer voice lines for them being found in the game's files.
Anna Williams, Jun Kazama, Ganryu, Gun Jack, Jinpachi Mishima, unknown.
Harada and the team wanted to do something wildly different this time around from all corners. The gameplay and mechanics, movement, the overall story, tone, atmosphere, and music. They left a lasting memory of adoration in some of those areas for fans, and a bitter taste in some others. Development wrapped up and Tekken 4 was released in July 2001 in arcades and March of 2002 for the PlayStation 2. Let's dive into the alleged black sheep of the Tekken franchise, Tekken 4. Tekken 4 had a lot of big changes in its core gameplay. For one, stages weren't never-ending fields with looping backgrounds anymore. You were in huge boxes with walls you could crash into. slopes to go up and down on, railings and pillars to hide behind, windows and objects to break, and people to be thrown onto. The movement of the game had a major change as well. For better or worse, well, a bit of good and mostly bad. The good being the addition of the sidewalk, and the bad being sidesteps and backdashes becoming abso-fucking-lutely worthless. One of the strangest additions to the movement and overall gameplay as well that we've never seen in Tekken since, and for a good reason, is the ability to freely move around before the match actually starts. You can't attack, so you will stay in neutral, but you can just... Why? Why did they even do this? Jin, who was crazy popular back in Tekken 3 thanks to his playstyle being a mix of Kazuya's classic Mishima Karate and Jun's Kazama style, was heavily changed in this game, having almost none of those moves anymore. He could still crouch dash and had his own version of the Mishima electrics and hell sweeps, but ultimately was very different, lacking other iconic moves such as the 1-1-2 flash punch combo. This was a risk that I would say paid off in the long run. But in any case, combos were heavily shortened and weakened, making the game rely more on poking, which was horrible considering jab frames were not universal for every character, allowing the likes of Steve and Jin to absolutely demolish most of the roster. This absolutely killed the competitive scene for Tekken 4 in such a short time, considering no patches were really made to fix anything, so people were stuck with a heavily unbalanced and messy game with a roster not even half the size of the previous entry. Throws were also massively overhauled. Because of the wall and wall pressure being such a huge factor in a match, they turned throws into so-called switch maneuvers, where you're either able to push the opponent towards the wall for more pressure, or switch the tide on your opponent and put their back to the wall instead. It was not a whole lot of fun to deal with, which is why ultimately most fans shifted back to Tag 1 when it came to competitive Tekken and tournaments. This beastly game here held the ground for competitive players for an entire 4 years, but 5 if you don't count the arcade release of Tekken 5 until we got it on console. The roster of Tekken 4 is either a bit of a downgrade or it's for the better depending on how you look at it. Some hate the tiny selection of characters, while some consider it better to have less characters with more unique movesets and playstyles and personalities, more compelling stories and the like. Therefore, they find themselves more invested in Tekken 4's smaller roster. It genuinely does fall short when you consider it may as well be 3 characters at most, when all the others get their asses beat because the few are overpowered. But even leaving that aside, Tekken 4 cut a lot of characters that TAC Tournament brought back. Some are understandable either for story reasons or even the fact that they're unneeded in light of similar playing characters. June, Beck, Bruce, Anna, Ganryu, and more were sidelined. Hell, this was even the first Tekken game ever to not include a playable variant of Jack, after the last game had 3 of them. And this wasn't for a lack of a Jack 4 model in the lore, he very well existed in the intro cutscene for Tekken 5. We had the returns of the big 3, Jin, Heihachi, and Kazuya, as well as iconic series veterans like Paul, Law, Yoshimitsu, King, Nina, and Lei, in addition to the other newcomers of Tekken 3, such as Brian, Hwoarang, Xiaoyu, Julia, and Eddie, who was a separate outfit for our first new character. 3 of our new characters this time around were separate appearances for characters who played the exact same way but were, well, actually different characters. Christy Montero, the capoeira fighter in Eddie Gordo, Miharu Hirano, and Xiaoyu, and Violet, a sort of alter ego for Lee with purple hair and some shades. Other than them, we had 3 actual newcomers. Steve Fox, who was a British boxing champion, Craig Marduk, an Australian Valtudo no-holds-barred champion, and Combat, a robot created by Lee, or Violet, and sent to test out his skill as a fighter, and also our Mimic character for Tekken 4. Which would make him not an actual newcomer, but just a reiteration of Mokujin, but shut up! Tekken 4 takes place 2 years after the events of Tekken 3 unfolded. After Jin flew off as a devil, he took control back of his human side, and knowing Heihachi would be on the hunt for him now that he knew he had the devil gene within him, he quietly fled to Brisbane, Australia. Where there, he would make efforts to throw away every single thing that associates him with his grandfather Heihachi and his late father Kazuya, and anything to do with the cursed Mishima blood. He threw away his lineage. He replaced the battle clothes he received for the 3rd tournament with new ones, opting for white flames and a Kazama sigil instead of red flames and the Mishima sigil. And of course, more importantly, he would enter a gym in Australia where he would begin training in the arts of karate. If he wanted nothing to do with the Mishimas, he would have to unlearn the style of fighting taught to him by Heihachi, which he would begin working on immediately. Day in and day out, Jin would train tirelessly to master karate so that one day he would get back at his grandfather Heihachi. Ogre was dealt with. There was no more threat of an Aztec god of fighting threatening the fighters of the earth. Heihachi would return to managing the Mishima Zaibatsu and continuing his general affairs. As for Hwoarang, he was now alone after the supposed death of his master Beck at the hands of Ogre. He reconnected with Jin after he had flown away following the King of Iron Fist Tournament 3. The two of them reconnected, though Hwoarang would soon sadly be drafted in the army back in his home in Korea, and he would have to leave there against his will. Xiao Yu wasn't able to get a hold of Jin either, as he felt that he could endanger her. Meanwhile, the failure to win the last tournament had sadly left both Paul Phoenix and Martial Law depressed. With Law's belts falling behind after his restaurant failed and closed down, he spent most of his days in a drunken haze, and lost his physique and the respect of his former students from when he managed his dojo years ago. As for Nina, after the tournament, she still failed to remember many things about her past, but her skills were still there as she continued doing assassin work. After the original king was killed at the hands of Ogre, Armor King fell into a state of deep depression at the loss of his dear friend. However, when he learned of King II, who was a kid in the original king's orphanage who donned the Jaguar mask, he did his best to train the new king into a feared fighter who would enter the third tournament. With a newfound drive and hope, he finished teaching him everything he could and tearfully said goodbye to him as King departed for the tournament. Despite King II eventually losing to Jin in the final round, Armor King was still proud of him and the fighter he'd become. However, sadly, fate would soon turn for the worse. Craig Marduk was a professional Valtudo wrestler who dominated the circuit for over 4 years before he was forcefully expelled following an unknown scandal. This drove Marduk into a violent, drunken bitterness, consumed by hatred and anger. He faded into obscurity as the professional wrestling world would go on without him. After months of silent depression and building up anger, Marduk was in a bar in Arizona drinking away all his problems when a brawl would break out. Marduk would end up gravely injuring his opponent, and when someone tried to intervene and stop him, Marduk, in his blind rage, would end up killing the man, screaming violently after. Of course, he was now convicted of second-degree manslaughter, and was sentenced to 10 years in the state penitentiary. But mysteriously, 2 years in, he was granted release after some anonymous benefactor had paid for the arrangement. Upon his release, he received an envelope containing a plane ticket and something else, which we'll discuss in a minute. Steve Fox was a professional British boxer enjoying a successful run as a young champion. He had a strange large scar on his right arm. He never knew the origin of his birth or his parents, having been adopted during infancy. He's never lost a fight and is at some point asked by the Mafia to throw a fight in exchange for some money. Because of his pride and his naivety, he refused and won the fight. The Mafia began to chase him. He had since escaped, and feeling like he was living on borrowed time as the Mafia were closing in, he didn't want to go out not knowing who his biological parents were. While all this was happening, Heihachi and the Zaibatsu were conducting research and finding out what G Corporation was up to, and suspected a certain somebody of being alive. Heihachi sends a Tekken Force squad to attack and infiltrate their research labs in an effort to obtain research notes, as well as that certain somebody's remains. At first, the operation goes smoothly and according to plan. Heihachi watches on silently on a monitor as one of his troops is carrying a camera mounted on his helmet into the infiltration. All of a sudden, they're met by a mysterious resistance. Several of them get taken out. As scores of them roll into the scene, they get wiped out one by one. Heihachi realizes, since Jin is far away, there really is one other person who could do this amount of damage. As one of the other cameramen falls back, Heihachi catches a glimpse of the attacker, his cold glare piercing the camera into Heihachi's soul. It was Kazuya Mishima, the son Heihachi thought he'd killed in the volcano 20 years ago. Kazuya proceeds to annihilate every last member of the Tekken Force in pursuit of him as Heihachi watches on in disbelief. As he wipes out scores of them, he leaves one of them temporarily, knowing Heihachi is watching, and he delivers a message. Kazuya was back for two reasons. First, to exact his revenge for what Heihachi had done to him and make up for the 20 years he'd spent in nothingness, and the second, he knew of the existence of his son, Jin Kazama. He would pursue and kill Jin, so he could take back the other half of his devil powers that were split when the other half went with Jin. Heihachi knew this, and knew there were now two devils in the plot. He devised a plan to lure them both and kill two birds with one stone. He officially announced the return of the King of Iron Fist Tournament 2 years after the last one. The King of Iron Fist Tournament 4 would take place soon, and with Jin completing his karate training and knowing he would meet his father Kazuya soon, he readied himself. While Kazuya and Heihachi were also readying themselves, every other fighter was struck by the chance and were getting themselves back into fighting shape. Martial Law and Paul Phoenix knew this would be their chance to shine once more. Martial Law would regain the respective fighters all over the world, and would gain the necessary funds to reopen his restaurant. Meanwhile, Paul would settle an old score with Kazuya. Hwoarang heard of this tournament, and in a quick decision, he knew he had to get over there and participate, if not for anything then to be able to rematch Jin. He quickly deserted from the army and fled Korea to enter the tournament. Meanwhile, Marduk's envelope, other than the plane ticket, contained a newspaper article about the upcoming tournament. Whoever paid for his release wanted to see him there. Steve Fox would also enter the tournament, knowing it was the only possible lead he had to obtaining information about his past. All the other fighters quickly shaped up and ready to enter the tournament. Nina Williams would also enter, and so would Yoshimitsu, wanting to gain funding for his Manji clan and enter a union with the Mishima Zaibatsu. Brian Fury would also enter to ask Yoshimitsu for help to get in contact with Dr. Boskonovich, as he hadn't long to live and his cyborg body was dying. Li Chaolan, disguised in an alter ego named Violet, would not enter himself, but rather he presented his new fighting robot, Combat, to enter the tournament as a test, as there was no model of Jack this time around. The last notable members to enter are Julia Chang, who wanted to gain funding for reforestation, and Detective Lei Wulong, who was in active pursuit of Nina Williams, with her being an assassin and all that. As the tournament began, several fighters went at it with each other. With Lei and Steve meeting and Lei pursuing Nina, he connects the dots that Steve may be a child of Nina following her cryosleep experiment years ago in the Mishima Zaibatsu. Steve, however, doesn't know this yet. In the next round, Marduk would enter the ring. He would meet the opponent he'd been anticipating, the man who had granted his release and flew him out here. He revealed himself to be none other than King.
Armor King was murdered. King swore upon Armor King's grave that he would seek revenge against the man responsible for his mentor's death.
And shockingly, consumed by utter rage, King would defeat Marduk and put him in the hospital, nearly killing him. King didn't care about the tournament anymore. Even though he'd won the match, he still left and went to visit Marduk in the hospital. But of course with the intention to kill him and put him out of his misery. As it's revealed to us, 2 years ago in that bar, the man who Marduk had murdered in cold blood was indeed Armor King. The reason Marduk was in prison, and the reason for King's grief and his want to release and kill Marduk was all revealed. Marduk had killed Armor King in that bar, and even as King tried to pull the plug and kill Marduk as he was defenseless right then and there, he couldn't do it. He couldn't bring himself to kill someone in cold blood, as he would be no better than Marduk in that case. Armor King wouldn't have wanted him to either. King would simply leave the hospital, still angry and bitter, but knowing he did the right thing. And as the tournament raged on, King left and Hwoarang would not be able to find Jin. Something was happening. The semi-final round was approaching and Jin still wasn't there, as the match that was supposed to be Jin versus Kazuya is cancelled, meaning Kazuya would win by default, advancing to the final round. Jin, on his way to the arena for the fight, was attacked by scores of Tekken Force. As he took out as many of them as he could, he was overpowered and was stabbed with tranquilizing syringes all over his body. Their effect would finally hit Jin as it made him fall into a deep sleep. The Tekken Force captured him and took him somewhere unknown, preventing him from competing. Foul play was clearly at work here. This doing reeked of Heihachi's handiwork as Kazuya approached him in the final round at the center of the fighting arena. He asked Heihachi where Jin is. Heihachi said that he'd tell him after the fight. Father and son were reunited once more. The events of the final round of the King of Iron Fist Tournament 1 and 2 would play out again as history repeated itself. And yet another bout between the two Mishimas, Heihachi promised he'd take Kazuya to Jin if Kazuya could beat him. The two went at it like they always do, and it was Kazuya who would pick up the victory this time around, beating Heihachi and winning the King of Iron Fist Tournament 4. He told Heihachi to get back up as he had a promise to fulfill. He'd take Kazuya to Jin, where the father would be able to get the other half of his devil power back from his son. The headlines were flying off the handle as the world would learn that Kazuya Mishima was alive. After that, the two Mishimas left the arena as Kazuya followed Heihachi. Heihachi would end up leading him to Hanmaru, a Mishima temple hidden in the mountains, and the place where he sealed his father, Jinpachi Mishima, and left him to die decades ago. This is where Heihachi revealed he was keeping Jin. The two of them entered the temple, and there Jin was, chained up and unconscious. The tranquilizing syringes he'd taken at the hands of the Tekken Force were still strong, as he was experiencing nightmares of his father, Kazuya Mishima, and the cursed blood he'd given him.
憎め呪え憎め呪え憎め憎め呪え憎め 目覚めろ風間陣お前さえいなければお前を倒して全てを終わらせる
He broke free of the chains, and in his rage and hatred for his family, began to once again awaken the devilish powers Heihachi had seen in the King of Iron Fist Tournament 3. Jin expressed his hatred for Kazuya, saying if not for his cursed blood, everything would be okay. He charged at his father. Kazuya and Jin would meet each other for the first time, and of course, in classic Mishima fashion, it would be in a fight to the death. Jin would gain the upper hand in the fight and begin to overpower Kazuya in his rage. As his devil powers were awakening further, he managed to knock Kazuya out. Heihachi approached, disappointed in what Kazuya had to offer, and prepared to fight Jin himself, saying this time he'll deal with him. Jin, after defeating Kazuya, would go on to once again battle his grandfather, and was still blinded by absolute rage. He overpowered Heihachi and defeated him just as he did with Kazuya. Jin held Heihachi by a shirt as the devil was taking over once more. The tattoos from his devil form materialized and his wings were growing, and as Jin was about to deal a final blow to kill Heihachi and end it all, he stopped himself in the devil's influence.
Kazuya, 風間純に感謝しろ。
Jin had rejected the devil, unlike his father Kazuya. But for how long? Tekken Force's story and the atmosphere of the game are largely why the game is referred to as the black sheep in the community, and it is often called the darkest Tekken, portraying themes like depression and alcoholism, murder and moral conflicts and self-loathing. While Tekken 4 definitely does take the cake, I would put Tekken 2 close behind it, as it was also dark and gritty and with an unmatched atmosphere, portraying similar themes. Both games had a lot of love from Tekken fans in these aspects, but sadly that wouldn't be enough to bring players to keep playing the game at the time, hence why most went back to TAC Tournament. But now, let's get into everyone's favorite part of these videos. The segment where we sit down and point and laugh at how stupid the endings are, and let me tell ya, even with Tekken 4 being the supposed darkest game in the series, it does not disappoint when it comes to absolutely hilarious endings. While some of the endings are genuinely really well done and are considered some of the best story-wise in the entire series, i.e. King's ending, Jin, Paul, Brian, the rest of them are absolutely comical in every sense. From the scenarios, the voice acting, the facial expressions, they're just so goddamn funny. Hwoarang's ending is a prime example of this, possibly my favorite Tekken ending in history. Hwoarang walks up to Jin in this parking lot, and then...
You're finally here. So, what do you want?
For some reason, they both talk to each other in English?
I'll take you on right here, right now. There's no reason to fight. You ain't got one? Well, I do.
Oh my god, bro.
So after the two of them fight, all of a sudden these soldiers come in and want to arrest Hwoarang or something for deserting. Why are they talking in hybrid British-American accents? Shouldn't they be Korean?
Sergeant! Desertion is an offense punishable by court-martial. Give yourself up, soldier!
So Jin is just like, yeah man, this ain't cool, let me just electric window fist this dude real quick. And Hwoarang joins him and kicks the other soldiers. So then this guy opens fire and tries to straight up kill them. And they just continue shooting at nothing while Jin and Hwoarang are just having a full-blown conversation. And then the soldiers just get tired and blow the entire car up with an RPG. That car probably belonged to some random innocent dude who just parked there on a Sunday night. Oh, brother. Then there's Martial Law's ending, where he finally won the tournament and reopened his restaurant, Martial China. He's walking around eavesdropping on customer opinions on the food when he glances over and hears these angry goons who aren't fans of set food.
Man, the food here sucks.
We have to pay for this? What did you just say?
You heard me, I said this food sucks. You expect us to eat this stuff?
What do you mean it sucks?
This pepper beef is too damn spicy.
So Law just decides to uppercut the guy for not liking the food.
What are you talking about? This is good.
I mean, you can't say that wasn't justified after his friend got launched into the ceiling for not being a fan of the food. So now we have Marduk's ending. You know, considering King's ending is deep and full of human emotion and darkness, you'd expect Marduk's to be something along the same lines, but instead, you have this.
Craig Marduk? It is you.
In comes the greatest Tekken character of all time, the legendary current Valtudo champion, Jeff Slater.
Valtudo champion. Hey, has the ex-champ forgotten how to fight? Come on, Marta. Bring it on. It'll be the biggest unofficial bout of the century. The badass reigning champ versus the legend who disappeared in the wake of a scandal. Oh, running away, huh? Afraid to see legendary fighter KO'd in the headlines?
Don't bother getting up.
And then there's Kazuya's ending.
I got a 12-pack of that gorilla. That shit you can only find walking along the hashish transport paths in Azerbaijan. I'm smoking on Bhutanese Shadow Garden grown dark evil pack.
Oh crap, that's the wrong one. Oh, there you go. I think Kuma's ending is the only one actually trying to be funny to some level, which is just perfect. Oh man, I gotta say I really appreciate the perfect balance between the goofy endings and the really dark and serious ones. With how generally more gritty this entry in the series is, some laughs are definitely needed here and there. But moving on now, another game mode we had was the returning Tekken Force, and for the last time sadly, although in Tekken 5 we had Devil Within, Tekken 6 had Scenario Campaign, and Tekken 8 had Operation Rebellion. Tekken 5 and 6 modes respectively felt like shit to play, meanwhile Tekken 8's was kind of a spam fest with too many enemies and wasn't even a full-fledged mode, more so just a chapter in the game's story mode. Tekken 4's Tekken Force mode is still probably considered its best iteration to this day. Instead of Tekken 3's side-scrolling combat, Tekken 4 featured an over-the-shoulder camera with the same moveset of a character as in the normal game. The camera and the level design were done much better. It didn't give you so much directional confusion as the old one did. It felt much more natural to play. It was pretty short, only 4 stages, but they were perfectly memorable and had a ton of replay value. The first stage being the lab with big steel doors and computers. The enemies were, as you'd expect, the Tekken Force. There were more of them attacking you at once than in Tekken 3, but it still felt better fighting them thanks to the camera, because you could actually see where you were going and what direction to attack. All the stages also had their own boss fights at the end. The first stage's boss fight was Combat. The second was Kuma or Panda, depending on who you were playing as. The third stage, and my personal favorite, was the Corridor, with Kazuya's Tekken 2 theme playing in the background. The atmosphere and darkness of the stage is beautiful and really takes you back to Tekken 2. The stage is a very long and dark straight path that seems to be inside of some sort of a temple. Once you reach the end, you go up a flight of stairs, and you face Kazuya as the boss of the stage, and interrupt his intro. Now for stage 4, which is the final one. You have a Mishima Fortress, which may or may not be Honmaru. This stage is almost completely traversed through breakable walls, which most of the time will have Tekken Force members sitting around in them. After breaking enough walls, you reach the outside and face off against a bunch of wannabe ninjas. And it's then you reach the final room of the level, where it's basically the normal game Honmaru stage, and you fight Heihachi as the final boss, just like in the Tekken Force mode in Tekken 3. And that wraps it up for Tekken Force. While there is still some strangeness in the controls as you might expect, considering it's still a fighting game and it's bound to confuse you if you played it with this kind of camera, and the fact that it's quite short, this is still considered the best iteration of Tekken Force by a good sum of the community. Before we wrap it up though, we've got to talk about that soundtrack. The soundtrack of Tekken 4 is beautiful and atmospheric, and adds so much to the stages, more so than I've seen in any other Tekken game. Tekken Tag had the strangest yet most unique soundtrack, but Tekken 4 probably still holds the record for most atmospheric. Let's take a look at one of my favorites, the theme for Honmaru, the Inner Shrine. A beautiful, calming track that fits the serene yet sinister mood of the stage, and of course perfect when it's accompanied by Jin and Kazuya's first meeting and fight together. To continue with the calm soundtracks, we have Authentic Sky. Possibly to this day one of the most iconic Tekken soundtracks that so many creators use as background music in their videos, as it just gives such a natural, relaxing vibe, yet also still fits perfectly for a fight on a rooftop. How about we switch up the vibe a little bit with that character select theme, Jet. It's such a tone-setting character select theme that captures the gritty atmosphere and the new era of Tekken so well. There's so many other tracks with all sorts of different moods, such as loud distorted rock guitars. Or how about some jazzy saxophones? The soundtracks rang in my head all throughout my childhood as I played these older games, yet despite Tekken 5's being the most memorable to me, I always found myself going back to Tekken Force for a more moody sound. And speaking of childhood, just as the last time, I would like to close the video speaking on the impact that this game had on me as a kid and my story with it. So, sit back, relax, and let's take yet another trip back to the 2000s. The year is probably 2009 or 2010. As a kid, I'd already played hours upon hours of Tekken 5 and Tekken Tag Tournament, and loved the series. And playing Tekken 5 meant I'd also played my fair share of Tekken 1, 2, and 3 through that game's arcade history mode. Meaning the one game in the series that had eluded me and I had always wondered what it was like but never found it was Tekken 4. I never managed to find a copy over the years. It was an incredibly rare find in our markets in the Middle East, which is why I stuck to Tekken 5 and then Tag Tournament. But on a certain day after I had just come back home from school, my dad had promised to take me shopping for games. When we went to the game store, I was allowed to pick out 2 new games. The first of my choices that day was the hidden gem of all hidden gems, 2003's Downhill Domination, a game I'd played time and again and found so goddamn fun. I remember holding entire tournaments on it with my brother and our friends. At this point, I hadn't played it in quite some time, so it was a chance to pick it back up. So, after I did, I looked up at the shelf, and there it sat. A nice copy of Tekken 4, and I was giddy. I told Dad we'd have to get this one. He said, "But son, don't you already have Tekken?" I'd played the Tekken games so much in front of my parents they even knew some of the names of the characters at that point. I said, "Yeah, but this one is Tekken 4, Dad. We don't have this one." My dad, being a dad, was like, "Alright, I don't understand why you'd get the older one when you have Tekken 5, but we'll take it." I went home that day and played the living crap out of Tekken 4. I was mesmerized by it all. Everything looked so unique and different to Tekken Tag and 5. The soundtrack slapped. Jin had a jacket instead of just being naked like in Tekken 5. I'd play a story mode over and over again and get to the final 2 fights with Kazuya and Heihachi to be like, look, he looks the way he did in Tekken 5, except he didn't actually, considering the pants he wore were completely different. Y'all wanna know who didn't wear any pants? But in any case, Tekken 4 was a breath of fresh air for me as a kid, and I enjoyed it to its fullest. It was and still is Tekken at its rawest. If there is one thing to praise it for, it's the incredible visuals, the atmosphere, the incredible art pieces, the character designs, and the harsh subject matter and the themes that the story tackled. It was spine-chilling playing the game at night as a child during those days. Every time I would reach the segments before the final battles, I would get unsettled looking at those gritty artworks of the characters, accompanied by the emptiness of that soundtrack and the lack of the narrator. Yet despite the unnerving feeling they gave me, I still had my eyes glued to the screen, looking at the amazing art before me. If Tekken 5 Jin wasn't enough for the kid me, Tekken 4's Jin solidified him as my favorite character. His story, his struggle, those incredible raw designs, those artworks, they just resonated with me, and even now in my unk status, I find myself just smiling looking at these artworks. I mean, just look at how goated my boy looked here. I squeezed out every bit of fun I could out of Tekken 4, despite the fact that the disc we got was buggy and every single ending we'd unlock for any character would literally just be the cutscene where Heihachi prepares to fight Jin in his ending. Whether you beat the game with Kazuya, Lei, Nina, Steve, Julia, or whoever else, you would always, and I mean always, just get the same cutscene. This of course confused me as a kid, but I went on to watch the original endings themselves on the internet later on. With the disc being already buggy on its own and a bit of time passing by, the game stopped working, and I would go back to Tekken 5 for a few years without really looking back much on Tekken 4. I'd get an Xbox 360 in 2012, making Tekken 5 the last Tekken game I played on the PS2. It was only years and years later, probably in the mid-2010s when I got back into Tekken, that I remembered Tekken 4 and the impact it had. Despite the issues, no other Tekken had its style and flair.